Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we've got a special episode for you. We are honored to be talking with several volunteer lawyers who sprung into action at airports around the country to help people caught up in the chaos that ensued after President Trump issued his executive order on immigration. This executive order, issued at the close of business on Friday, January 27th, resulted in a slew of deportations and detentions of travelers who were traveling with what they thought were valid visas. It's also generated a number of emergency injunctions in federal courts around the country. So we are going to talk about all of this. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience, so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
So we'd like to welcome to the podcast Sarah Sherman Stokes, who is a clinical instructor at Boston University School of Law, and she runs the Immigration Rights Clinic. And thank you, Sarah, for joining us today on the podcast.
Of course, my pleasure. Happy to be here in these uncertain times.
Exactly. So can you just tell us a bit about yourself and the work that you do at BU?
Absolutely. So I teach here in the Immigrants Rights Clinic at Boston University School of Law. I also teach immigration law here. And in the Immigrants Rights Clinic, we represent adults and children, refugees fleeing human rights abuses, abused, abandoned, and neglected children, asylum seekers, and detainees. Pretty much, we represent a number of, the most vulnerable non-citizens who are facing deportation from the United States, and students represent them. Students act as the primary attorneys in those cases. Of course, on my bar license and with my supervision.
Thankfully, but yes.
small fact, yeah.
Wow.
But that's what we do, and unfortunately, our work has become, in some ways, we've sort of always been fighting this fight. I've been doing this work in some capacity for a number of years, but in the last week in particular, this work I think has taken on new relevance and new importance and new urgency.
Absolutely. So how did you find out about the executive order last week?
Yeah, so I think probably like many immigration lawyers, it was probably on social media that I first saw the leaked memo, because there were 3 immigration-related executive orders that came down last week, and so of course it was probably either on social media or on one of the sort of many dorky immigration lawyer listservs that I'm on, where people kind of get really down and dirty with the Immigration and Nationality Act and kind of parsing the different statutes, and looking at the regulations, things like that. So people were leaking this information, and then I like many other people were kind of over the weekend watching the fallout and seeing what was happening at airports. On Saturday night I put my kids to bed, and my parents stayed at my house, and I drove myself to the airport for the protest, like many other people. And that was my first glimpse into sort of how urgent and how real this was. This is not a drill.
Right.
This is really happening.
Right.
And there were a number of lawyers. There were about, I think, there were several hundred people, maybe more, at Logan Airport on Saturday night. And it was that night that there was a complaint filed in federal court, and then early on Sunday morning, a judge in Boston federal court, or a federal court here in Boston, issued a temporary restraining order that has been really generous. Generous.
I think what was so amazing to me is I was also watching a lot of this unfold in social media, and we belong to one of the same lawyer groups, which is how we were able to be connected. I think for me, what was amazing was reading the accounts of people chanting, like, "Let the lawyers in," which I thought was just so powerful, because when in most of our lives, have we ever heard anyone chant for the lawyers? I don't know if I can find a moment in history, recent history, that I've heard people chant for the lawyers. So I thought that was really powerful. Right? Yeah. And then
We're such a marginalized group.
Exactly. And then I also heard, and I think it was out of Boston, but I also read an account where it was mostly women lawyers who came to argue for that restraining order in Boston. And many of them had been at a gala together and were arguing in federal court in formal gowns, holding the Immigration Rights Act in their hands. And to me, when you dream about the power of the law, I mean, those images to me, I don't think I will ever forget them, and I wasn't there.
Right. I think, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. And I think, there was a great Boston Globe article written about sort of how this all unfolded. And to me, it read basically like a movie script. Mm-hmm. I imagine, I imagine this, basically being some Hollywood script where, this team or this army of women lawyers rushes to federal court. I think one of the only men in the courtroom was actually the assistant U.S. attorney, who, in the movie version would, of course, be played by Mark Wahlberg, because he must be in all Boston-related movies.
Totally.
But the judge was a woman, and it was Susan Church. I know Susan Church and Heather Yance and Carrie Doyle, who were some of the real forces behind this. And we're really on the front lines and are really just tremendous attorneys. They're also, they're all badass immigration attorneys. They're also all moms. And, they were in the middle of, I think, things like, rock climbing with their kids or skiing or hockey practice or things, and they had to leave those things and run over to Logan Airport or run over to federal court. And it's pretty inspiring, really. It's pretty amazing to see lawyers really showed up on Saturday and have continued to show up in a really powerful way all week, which I think is, we are not always on the side of good, right?
Yeah.
There are lawyers that have done some really, really bad things, and it's really inspiring, I think, for me as a law professor, and I think and hope for my students to see lawyers showing up in this way and supporting one another and being on the right side of the law, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, I find it heartened when some of the social media groups that I'm a part of, they're the nonprofit organizations that are really coordinating a lot of these efforts ongoing at the airports, since this is not over by any stretch of the imagination. They're talking about how they are, they have long lists of volunteers and they're coordinating trainings. Right. And the trainings are so crowded with lawyers who want to be trained doing habeas petitions that they can't, they're offering web versions. And I mean, to me, just this idea that lawyers all over the country are really, those in the profession already are really stepping up and feeling a call that I can only imagine that the tone on campus has to be somewhat the same. Do you feel a shift in the campus with what's going on?
Yeah, I do, and I think what's important. I think it's great, and it's really exciting to feel the energy and sort of this drive to do something. Right, students want to be told, like, where can I plug in? How can I be supportive? How can I help? I've gotten a number of emails from students, all different kinds of students, not necessarily students who are in the immigration clinic, but really from all over the law school, emailing me and saying, either I have language skills and I want to help, or just I see this, I'm outraged, what can I do? And it's really wonderful. The first, I brought some students to the airport to observe and interview arriving travelers on Monday afternoon, and the students I brought on Monday, they had no background in immigration law. They are in our IP and entrepreneurship clinic, but they were so outraged about what they had heard, and it actually was affecting some of their clients, and they wanted to basically drop everything and come. Tomorrow morning, Friday morning, I'll be taking another group of students in coordination with AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and the ACLU. They're sort of in charge of staffing the airport to make sure we have people there to ensure compliance with the order. So we'll be going back. And again, I've had a lot of interest in going back and being present. Just one thing that I do want to mention, because you said, it's like we've got more lawyers than we know what to do with. My hope is that we can direct some of that energy to other efforts too, because there's always been immigration, refugee, and asylum work ongoing, right? It didn't start with this executive order, and it's not going to end when this executive order is hopefully overturned by a court of law, or when this president is no longer in power, that work is not going to be over. And so I hope that this, as horrible as this moment is, as scary as this moment is, frankly, as unconstitutional as this moment is, I hope it can be kind of a galvanizing force to compel people to get involved in these issues for the long term, even if they're not practicing immigration law, to take a pro bono case or in otherwise kind of volunteer their time, because these people, these stories, these families were here before and they will be here after.
That's very true. When I practiced big law, my firm had a pro bono partner who focused on asylum work. And so we were able to do asylum work in some of our pro bono cases. And that was my first introduction really to immigration, and showing up in immigration court, not having any idea what I was doing, but doing my best and really getting a window, and this was years ago, but into what it was like to be an immigrant, to have that fear. It is a group of people that are, and many of them children or moms who really do need protection and people to shepherd them through something so incredibly scary. I can only imagine how scary it would be if you were flying in on an airplane and then you got stopped. I don't even like to get stopped by TSA to go through my bags, let alone stopped and told I can't walk into the country.
Right. And I think that uncertainty and that fear is just pervasive. Being at the airport on Monday, we were waiting with a lot of family members who were waiting for their loved ones, including a number of, teenage and adult children who were waiting for a parent to return from Iran or Iraq. And the kind of fear and trepidation, was palpable. I remember sitting in particular with a young man who his friends had come with him to the airport to support him because he wasn't really sure what was going to happen. His father was an elderly green card holder from Iraq. Okay. And we waited with this young man and his friends, and we're just, making small talk. They were in their early 20s. So we were just sort of going in between, kind of chit-chatting about, things that 20-year-olds talk about, and then the pressing reality of what was actually unfolding, or could be unfolding behind the scenes, because we were not permitted to go back into secondary inspection. Lawyers have been forbidden from going back into secondary inspection. So we were waiting, and 1 hour after the flight landed, he wasn't out. And 2 hours after the flight landed, he wasn't out. And 3 hours after the flight landed, he wasn't out. And this young man's father didn't have a cell phone, and there was no way for this young man to contact him. And so we were just waiting. And it was, that uncertainty and that fear and that powerlessness was really palpable and really hard. Now, he did finally emerge after over 3.5 hours of questioning and secondary inspection. But that was something that he had not been subject to. That was certainly something he had not been subject to prior to the announcement of the executive order, during his prior trips back to the United States.
Yeah, I can only imagine, the kind of thickness in the air, because that's so heavy. And I think that it's that acknowledgement of, it can be really intimidating and scary when the government exerts power like that. And then you're cut off from communication, you're cut off, from your loved ones. And what do you do but wait?
Right. Yeah. And, we approached customs and asked them several times. I went with him. He went by himself, the young man, to sort of say, can you at least tell me, where he is? They couldn't. Or excuse me, they wouldn't.
Right.
And so I'm pretty sure they could, but they wouldn't. So that was sort of what was unfolding on Monday. And frankly, it could have been much worse, but for the incredible work of this team of mostly women lawyers who was, knocking down the doors of federal court late on Saturday night. Yeah. It's really incredible.
Yeah, it is so amazing. And, one of the things you said that I thought was really powerful is talking about kind of the fact that there's always been a need for folks to be engaged in the immigration process because of, the importance of legal representation for these folks, some of whom are the most vulnerable. And I think, maybe for all of us lawyers out there who are and law students who are feeling impassioned by what they see going around them, it's not just going to be immigration where we need advocacy in this ongoing political climate. And so maybe one of the things that we can all do is start to think about the the pieces of the political and legal landscape that we find that really are meaningful to us, and start getting educated and start joining the organizations who, listservs who are going to be able to facilitate whatever next wave of a response is going to be necessary when the next thing happens. Because it might be First Amendment issues, and just seeing some of the stuff happening in UC Berkeley come out. It's about the protests in UC Berkeley, federal funding and when it's appropriate for federal funding to be cut off. There's going to be a plethora of stuff.
I think that's the message. I mean, so when I talk about immigration, it's been happening, it's going to keep happening. I mean, I think the blueprint for a racist and xenophobic and frankly anti-American immigration policy was written like over 100 years ago. This is a pattern of, Chinese exclusion acts, internment of Japanese. There's a pattern here. These kinds of messages, this kind of rhetoric, and these kinds of executive orders are not new. In fact, for any historian of immigration law, they are quite familiar. But as you say, like, there's room to do good as a lawyer, whatever kind of lawyer you are. So, my passion is immigration. That's where I plug in, and that's where I feel like I can do the most meaningful work. But that's going to be different for every law student and every attorney. And we're going to need, administrative law scholars and constitutional law scholars, and we're going to need people that know commercial law, and we're going to need people that know, there's going to be, I think, unfortunately, there are going to be opportunities to do what's right and to do good in kind of all areas of the law. And so it's, I think, about helping students find, kind of where they can plug in and play to their strengths.
Yeah, but if I was an incoming law student, somebody who just applied to law school, or a first or second year law student, I think electives, like you were listing off some of the electives that you teach around immigration in the law schools, would be a great way for students to start to find their passion. I know I took a First Amendment class when I was in law school that was really fascinating and covered a bunch of nuances of constitutional law around the First Amendment that I didn't have the opportunity to learn in con law because, we didn't, there's no time in a 4-unit con law class to cover in detail, the First Amendment, or even, federal courts classes that are really going to teach you about how some of these constitutional challenges play out in the court system. But I think you can use the school to really find the areas that you want to throw yourself into. And and even if you're a big law lawyer or you go that firm route, pro bono programs, are pretty amazing. And I know we've interviewed somebody else in this podcast who's a big firm tax lawyer who showed up at the airports and was able to, assist in many ways.
Right. And I should say, I think, just because someone is a non-citizen doesn't mean the challenges they face are all related to immigration status, right? I mean, they might face, challenges around tax issues, around employment law, around all kinds of other areas of the law where, I'm not an expert necessarily in those areas. I may be an expert in that person's immigration status, but I don't but other people are experts in how their immigration status interfaces with other aspects of the law. And that's incredibly important in this context, but also just sort of in the larger context of thinking about, where law students and attorneys can do good and can make a difference. We, at the airport on Monday, and I'm sure tomorrow again, we had all kinds of lawyers at the airport, criminal law attorneys, immigration attorneys, corporate lawyers, people doing M&A, and, all kinds of different stuff. What motivated them was, wanting to be present and bear witness and try to be supportive in whatever way they could.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine from college who was at SFO, and I had asked him if he wanted to talk about his experience on the podcast, and he said, well, I don't practice immigration. I didn't know what to do, so I was just writing down names on lists and like showing them where the lawyers were who knew what they were talking about. He's like, so I'm not sure that I was a lawyer advocate. I was just doing my part, holding up signs, trying to direct people.
And that's an important role too.
Yeah, it's true. And he speaks multiple languages. He was trying to help people who needed, help with translation. But I think that showing up is just a big part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Showing up is a huge part of it. I mean, that's a part of being a professional too, right? Part of, half the work is showing up. I think someone famous probably said that. And I think that's an important thing to pass on to law students as they make their way out into the world. Sometimes it's just being there. Sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time and being willing to do the hard work, whatever it may be.
So I think the one interesting thing about the clinics is the fact that, students were already involved in doing some of this law, and then they were really able to, go into the airports led by their professors and kind of be present at this very critical time. And I think it says a lot about the clinic process, because oftentimes I know a lot of the clinics I know about at schools in the Bay Area are all about representing those who need, our class of people who really need the representation: child advocacy clinics, family law clinics, immigration clinics, even some investment clinics where people are trying to recover money that may have been, falsely taken away from them. So right. I do think that as a law student, maybe really trying to engage with the clinic process at your school, if this is something you're interested in, is a great gateway to advocacy.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm totally biased. I'm a big clinic proponent, and I make that pitch every chance I get. So here's my official clinic pitch.
Oh, happy to hear it. Let's hear it. I love the clinic pitch.
I think, well, let me just step back for a moment. I think that any kind of experiential education is tremendously valuable. It's a really nice complement to the kind of learning that students are doing in their sort of podium or doctrinal classes, which is really important, and I don't want to diminish the value of that. It is extremely important. It's foundational, and we couldn't do the work that we do without it. But I think that pairing that kind of deep analytical thinking with the kind of deep analytical thinking that you do actually in practice is really valuable for students. There's social science research that shows from Harvard Business School that shows that we learn better when we basically learn, then do, and then reflect on what we've done. And that's really the model that, in its most sort of basic form, that's the model that we employ in the clinic. And I think that most clinical professors and instructors employ is that kind of learn, do, reflect, or plan, do, reflect. And so I think experiential education is extremely valuable. I know it's cliche to say, but, we wouldn't tell a doctor to, perform brain surgery if she had never practiced doing that in medical school, right?
Let's hope not, right?
and yet, there is this expectation, although I think it's changing, that lawyers should be able to hit the ground running on day one when they haven't really done any lawyering in law school, if they haven't done a clinic or an externship or a semester in practice or something else like that. And so I just, I see such tremendous growth and development in my clinical students over the course of the year. I teach in a year-long immigrants' rights clinic here at BU, and it's pretty tremendous to see the growth and development of the law students over the course of the year. They really go from acting more like an intern, expecting me to kind of tell them what to do. And my hope is, and the trajectory that I usually see, is that by the second semester, they're coming to me and saying, okay, so there was this problem. I researched it. Here are the 3 things I think we could do, and here's the option I think we should choose. And that's where I want them to get. They're doing the thinking and the learning and the reflecting for themselves before coming to me to sort of check in, rather than coming to me first and saying, "Help! What do I do?" which is often and understandably their first reaction. So I just think, being able to have that kind of learning environment before you're actually a lawyer. Right? So being able to have that learning experience when you have the support and supervision of a clinical professor is so valuable. And it also, I found that, I've had a lot of students that don't really know what kind of law they want to practice. And being in a clinic and taking that deep dive into a certain subject matter, getting to know clients face-to-face can be extremely powerful. I think a lot about a student I had who came in, had a career in the military, and then came into the clinic. He really knew nothing, by his own admission, about immigration, but wanted to kind of challenge himself, had heard this was a good clinic, and he's now an immigration lawyer in Chicago.
That's awesome.
That was never part of his sort of thought process going into law school. And so I think, that speaks to the power of clinics and the power of that human experience of connecting with a client, and kind of finding your niche.
And maybe he was at O'Hare this weekend. You never know.
Very possible. I should email him. I'd like to think he was there. That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I think it's a really important message to law students, and to realize that, through these programs in your law schools, you can gain the skills that you're going to need to do whatever sort of advocacy you decide to do. But if engaging in the political climate is the type of advocacy you'd like to do, you never know, maybe even your clinic will facilitate you getting to be on the ground in these critical times. And thank you for all the work that you do at BU. If I was a BU student, I would definitely send you an email to ask how I can get in your clinic. So if you're listening to this and you go to BU, you should reach out.
Feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to talk anytime about the clinics here.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to have another law mama on the podcast. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for covering this issue.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So I'm here with Cindy Grossman, who is a law firm partner, and Cindy spent part of her weekend at Newark Airport working on, well, I guess we can say the people who were impacted by this executive order that President Trump issued on immigration. So Cindy, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's definitely our pleasure. So just give me a little bit of background. I mean, is this something you practice normally or not?
No, this is way out of my comfort zone.
Okay, because you're a tax lawyer, right?
I do. Yes, I do tax planning for high net worth individuals. So my firm is basically a private client service firm, and we typically do not deal in issues where people's personal liberties are at stake. So this was a totally new experience for me.
It actually sounds like your normal work might be as far as possible from what you were actually doing in this.
Yeah, pretty much. I think these are, I say that, except that in terms of the people that we're dealing with, because there was so much confusion, I think, over the weekend as to how this ban was supposed to be implemented, there were, we very well could have had clients caught up in it, because we do a lot of international planning and cross-border planning. And so we have a lot of non-U.S. clients that certainly could have been impacted by this had they been traveling.
Yeah, that's a really interesting...
in terms of the actual work,
right?
Yes. It's very
no, I mean, that's a really interesting point. I think one of the things, obviously, that shocked people the most here was that a lot of these people were green card holders.
Oh, yeah. These are not, of course, refugees and people that, are really, truly trying to escape terrible situations were caught up in this, unfortunately. But there were just, doctors, scientists, professors, people that don't fit your typical category of, people being denied entry, got swept up in this ban.
No, I think of all of my friends who are, have green cards and never, I think, thought twice about the fact that they can just suddenly be denied at the border.
Right.
I have a number of friends who, were like, oh, I had a green card for 10 years and I finally decided to get citizenship for some random reason. But they're like, thank goodness, because this could have been me.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with this?
So after the election, I joined a group called Lawyers for Good Government, and I think they started off as just a Facebook group of sort of downtrodden lawyers.
Right, I think initially it was like Lawyers of the Left when I joined it back in the day.
Yes, yeah. So then it morphed from that. I think there are actually plenty of Republicans in there as well now, and it's just people that were sort of upset at the breakdown of processes that happened during the election, and so that's where it started. And then when the immigration ban was passed, a subgroup was created out of that group to deal with the immigration issue. And so I had been following, the posts in the main group, just sort of out of curiosity, and then saw that there was this immigration subgroup, and then I joined that. Again, just sort of wanting to get more information and knowing what was going on. And that's when I started just catching up on the posts from the last 12 hours. And this was Sunday that I was looking at it. So a lot had been happening. And I was absolutely blown away by the level of organization and involvement by lawyers all over the country. It was such like a beautiful thing, because
it was. I think suddenly lawyers were cool.
Yeah, exactly. And as a tax lawyer, somebody who's just kind of down in the nitty-gritty of the tax code or helping people save money on taxes, I don't really feel that sort of primal lawyer call so much on a daily basis. And so when I was reading, my daily job sort of feels divorced from the Atticus Finch type lawyer, right? And so as I was reading these posts and seeing a lot of other lawyers like me, like corporate lawyers, not necessarily immigration lawyers, but everybody just sort of pouring all of their heart and soul into helping these people, I was like, oh, this is incredible. This is a great way to give back. And, really, I am not an immigration lawyer, but, all lawyers know how to research and write. Right. And, and so I thought, well, at the very least, I can show up and do that, and support somebody who actually knows what they're doing. And so that's what I did. And I live about 20 minutes from Newark Airport. And so I got hooked up with the Newark group and signed up to volunteer at the airport with them on Monday. And that was a great, it was very quiet while we were there. There was one family that was supposed to arrive in the afternoon, and it turned out that they were actually on the next day, so we didn't actually have anybody coming in. There was one person that was detained while we were there, and unfortunately we did not know about them until I think much later in the day, and that's been one of the big challenges with this project, is getting information on people coming in.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge issue. We have
a very unscientific way of doing it, which is looking for distressed people at baggage claim.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's so
expected somebody.
That's sort of what's so crazy about the whole thing is you're basically, I mean, obviously you can't contact, your essential, like the person who's really the client in the end directly because they're in detention. And so what are people doing?
Well, so these are people that are, they're coming from these other countries, and they don't even, a lot of them don't even know that there's this army of lawyers sitting on the other side of immigration waiting to help them. So they don't necessarily know to ask for a lawyer. And Customs and Border Patrol is not letting lawyers back there, which, is in violation of the stay. So that's been a real issue. And so we've actually been trying to figure out, how to it's really like a information sharing problem at this point. How do we alert people that are trying to get to the United States that, hey, if you have a problem once you get here, there's a group of lawyers right outside immigration and you need to figure out how to get to them. There have been, there's been discussion about figuring out how to create some sort of attorney-client relationship with these people before they board their plane, which involves getting, I think it's called a G-28, which is sort of a notice of appearance, getting one filled out, with that client's name on it, with a lawyer's name on it, and then having that person have that document with them as they board the plane.
So
and they basically have a lawyer waiting for them.
I mean, waiting for them where they go, isn't that the issue?
Yeah. And even if they have that form, I mean, the problem is, it seems like there's so much confusion on the enforcement side with Customs and Border Patrol that I think that they are still trying to figure out how this is supposed to be enforced and what they are allowed to let detainees do. And so even if somebody walked off the plane with this G-28, I'm not really sure that that's going to help them.
Right. Well, I mean,
Customs and Border Patrol can still sit back there and hold them, keep them away from the lawyer. And the lawyer, it's not like we're going to go break down the door at Customs.
Right. Well, that's kind of one of the frustrating things about this, I think, is like, as you mentioned earlier, you alluded to, like, there's a stay. I mean, there are various stays in place across the country that are essentially, I mean, I think we can say they're being ignored. It is this question of, well, I mean, that would be a much longer discussion that probably we should have in a constitutional law class. But I mean, it is this kind of fascinating separation of powers sort of, in the real world thing where, the judicial branch is like, look, you have to do this. And the Border Patrol is basically like, no, we're not going to do it.
It is. Yeah, it is. And it's, I have never paid so much attention to constitutional law and like learning about, okay, who's the enforcement arm of which branch, because now it really matters, like if Customs and Border Patrol is refusing to enforce the stay, then, who do you get to go and, serve the order on them and say, hey, you guys are in violation of this.
Yeah, exactly.
Apparently that's the U.S. Marshal Service.
Right, and the marshals are saying they're controlled by the Attorney General, so it's this whole like circular situation.
Exactly.
All right, well, let's not dive too deeply into that depressing aspect of things. Tell me a little bit more about what you actually did and the sort of people that were there with you. I mean, did you literally just sort of show up at the immigration or at the international terminal and be like, "Hey, I'm here. Give me something to do"?
Well, I mean, we have like I said, it's shockingly organized for, we're on day 4 of this. So there are sign-up sheets, there's sign-up sheets that go around, you like using Sign Up Genius, or the Newark group has a spreadsheet in Google Docs, and, we have slots open, and everybody takes 3-hour shifts throughout the day, and we're basically there from 7 a.m. until 1 a.m. Mm-hmm. And of course, if we found out about a flight coming in later than that, somebody would be there. And when we sign up, we usually make sure that there's at least one immigration lawyer at the airport, with the other lawyers who may not be necessarily immigration lawyers. And then we usually have at least one Farsi or Arabic translator with us as well. And so there's about 5 or 6 people at Newark. Newark is a much smaller and quieter operation than JFK. JFK has an actual army of lawyers. So
they have
to somebody at JFK, that would be you'd get a totally different scene from them. But anyway, we basically just we didn't have, like I said, we didn't have anybody coming in while I was there, so we sat around the table. There was, a lot of talk about the discussion. And it was a great learning opportunity, because when I was there were 3 immigration lawyers, and then 3 of us were not. Mm-hmm. And so the 3 of us who weren't kind of got a crash course in immigration.
Interesting.
I learned what a G-28 was, and I learned, just about, got a rundown on the executive order from an actual immigration lawyer, which was really helpful. Mm-hmm. And then, they sort of told us how to interact with Customs and Border Patrol, and so it was kind of a neat, I felt like a first-year associate,
right?
Which was kind of fun, just learning from the masters. And it was a really diverse group too, which I thought was really wonderful. We had 2 Hispanic lawyers, one of whom worked in big law, and the other one was with a nonprofit, and then me, and then there was a retired lawyer who, I think she did corporate law. Mm-hmm. There was a young woman attorney who was Egyptian, who had worked with refugees in the past, and I think she works for a nonprofit now as well. And then we had our Arabic translator. We had 2 Arabic translators. One was a woman who grew up in Missouri, but her parents were from Qatar. And then a young man who grew up in the Northeast, went to Middlebury, and works for a Jordanian school. He works out of New York, but for a school in Jordan. So he's fluent in Arabic and French, and then our Egyptian attorney, I think she also spoke Farsi. So we had it pretty much covered.
It's kind of amazing that all these people just sort of self-organized on such short notice.
Yeah,
to be that's impressive.
Yeah, it really was. That's the thing that has just totally bowled me over, is the organization at this. I mean, we have a centralized area for documents, and it's organized even across the airports to some extent. There's a daily call that happens where somebody from each airport signs on, and they share information about potential detainees, and we just talk about kind of the traffic flow and what's going on and what kind of interactions we're having with Customs and Border Patrol. So there's a huge amount of information sharing going on across the country between these lawyers. And I sat in on the Newark call, and it was fascinating, because you're hearing from the people at DFW, which has a much more active situation than we did. They have actual detainees there. There's a huge, number of lawyers there. And so it was interesting to just kind of get that snapshot of what's happening across the country. But then there's also this great, resource sharing that's happening. And so people are putting, copies of all of the lawsuits that have been filed in the central location, and people can look at those and, as lawyers do, copy and paste and make it your own, if you need it. And then there's people have been compiling,
immigration resources for lawyers that aren't immigration lawyers.
Right.
So there's this great set of documents that I got onto, and I could just sort of read and get like this crash course in immigration law. And so it makes you feel a lot better showing up, especially someone like me who doesn't really have any idea what I'm doing on, in immigration, to at least have, some sense of kind of get my bearings with the documents, and then at least I can be a little more helpful with the lawyers who are actually immigration attorneys. But yeah, so the organization and the information sharing has been really spectacular. And again, it blows my mind that it's really only been 4 days, and it's already
right.
This like amazing organization level.
And what's the situation? I'm talking to you on Wednesday. So what are people still at most of these airports? It seems like a lot of people are just not being allowed to board from wherever they're coming from, even if they theoretically should be allowed in at this point.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see how the conversation has shifted, like from Saturday to Monday to today. So Saturday obviously was this major emergency situation where people were actually being put on airplanes and turned around,
which is crazy.
And so they were, I think there was one, I can't remember where it happened, but somebody actually chased an airplane down. Like they went out on the tarmac and pulled this guy off the airplane. Wow. Yeah, it was crazy. And so you had that, and then once there was clarification about once the stay was in place and they were no longer actually putting people on planes, that sort of happened in conjunction with the airlines saying, we're not actually going to let anybody else on the planes at their departure city. And so that, I think, really slowed the traffic down.
Right.
And so there was sort of like self-selection, going on by the airlines, in the originating countries. And then what started happening is, the airlines were letting people on that weren't necessarily covered by this ban, and those people are getting picked up and usually having to go through pretty intensive secondary screening, even though they are not part of, they have no connection with one of the 7 countries. They might be from some other Middle Eastern country. I've heard of Indian
I've heard Mexicans
citizens getting detained, Mexican. There was, and a lot of these are anecdotes, so I don't really know.
It's hard to say. Like I've heard, I'm actually living in Mexico City right now, so I'm on a lot of like Mexico City groups. They're not legally related, but people are sort of, my daughter flew to LAX and this is what happened. And I have no idea if that's true, but it's at least concerning.
Yeah, and I heard a story today about a woman who, and this was Saturday, but she's a legal permanent resident from Tobago. And she made it over here and then was going through secondary screening, and they asked her what her religion was, and she told them she was Muslim, and then they asked her party affiliation. They said she was Democrat, and they put her on a plane back.
Wow.
And so those are the types of stories I'm hearing. There's no way to verify them. It's kind of heard secondhand, but I'm
hearing a lot of them. Exactly. I'm hearing a lot of them from different places and different airports, and it's definitely concerning. I think that's part of the problem with this information ban is just no one knows what's happening. I heard of people, I don't know if it's SFO or somewhere, where they're literally filing like Freedom of Information Act requests to try to figure out like, are you holding people?
Right. Yeah, there's no way to know. We were told specifically on Monday when I was there, I checked in with Border Patrol 2 or 3 times, and there's one officer that we had been speaking with who had been, fairly cooperative with us, or at least friendly. And so we would always ask for him. And when our shift changed and it was my turn to go ask, I kind of got the runaround from them. They said, he's on the phone. And I said, okay, well, I'll wait till he gets off the phone.
Right.
So I waited, and then they came out maybe 5 minutes later and said, can I help you? I said, well, I'm trying to speak to this officer who I was told was on the phone. They were like, oh, no, he's over in Terminal C.
Interesting. Why does he normally talk to me?
So they're doing things like normally the Customs and Border Patrol office is open, like the door is open, the window is open, so you can see in there. They've shut the window, they've shut the door, they've lowered the blinds. So it's, just like weird cagey stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of very strange. And to be fair, like I don't think they have any idea what they're supposed to be doing either.
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, it's like nobody really knows what the situation is or what exactly, I mean, so I feel like there's a lot of, I feel sympathy for a lot of people involved in the situation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they are trying to do their jobs, and I think and Saturday was such a mess. I mean, the rollout of this thing was it was a total disaster. So, I mean, I do sympathize with all of the law enforcement people trying to make sense of this thing, and I'm sure that they're getting conflicting reports. And then, it doesn't help to have like this army of lawyers sitting outside banging down your door.
And an army of protesters
trying to get information. And the protesters too. Yeah, so it was kind of a high.
It's definitely interesting times. Yeah. All right. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, but if people are interested in getting involved in this, I mean, a lot of our audience is law students, some young lawyers. Do you have any sense of what people could be doing if they're interested in helping out?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, speaking from personal experience, don't worry about not having experience.
Right.
Because there are plenty of people that are willing to help, and there's lots of materials out there that have been compiled. So, law students can certainly help, and even lawyers that are not immigration attorneys should not feel intimidated or, like they're out of place or they shouldn't do this. Mm-hmm. I would definitely encourage everybody to. I think the best place to start is to get on the Facebook group for Lawyers for Good Government.
Mm-hmm. And we can link to that.
Join join the immigration subgroup. And that's where, and actually I think Lawyers for Good Government has a website too. That might, actually no, I was on their website earlier and it didn't link you up to the people,
right.
That are like actually implementing this. I think that the Facebook group is better for that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of airport by airport. So like JFK has this great website. Those people have I think they have like a professional social media team on this. I think their website is, I think it's no ban JFK.
Yeah, I've seen that hashtag.
Yeah. And
we'll find it and link to it in the show notes.
Okay. So they have this great website set up. Newark does not have a website, but you can get to us through Twitter. I think all the major airports do have Twitter accounts. DFW, Dulles, JFK, us, and I think LAX has one too. Mm-hmm. And that might actually be the best place to start, just because then you don't have to sift through all of the Facebook posts trying to find the various sign-up links. Mm-hmm. You can just tweet at the airport. Not at the airport, but tweet at the lawyer, the airport lawyer Twitter handle.
Okay. We'll find
and
some
I've got those. I can send those to you.
Perfect.
If you want to include them.
We will.
For the major airports. But that would, and if somebody, if people want to get just a good sense of what's going on, and they have some extra time, then yeah, definitely get on the Facebook page. And that way you can sort of read through the stories, and there's a lot of calls for help on there. Hey, I heard about this, this family coming in from X country, they're coming in through LAX. Can we make sure that there's somebody from LAX there, or somebody notify ACLU? I mean, it's pretty cool how coordinated it is. But anyway, there's still no central repository for the signups
right.
across the country.
Well, I mean, that makes sense. As you said, it's been like 3 or 4 days at this point. So no, I think it's amazing the work that you've done and everyone else has done. I mean, just if nothing else, getting all this information out into the public view, and a lot of people are understandably very outraged about it.
Right.
So, I mean, definitely a crazy, difficult situation, particularly, I think, on Saturday and Sunday. And I think it sounds like it's going to be ongoing for a while. Is this something you're interested in possibly staying involved with?
Yeah, actually, it's something that I was interested just after the election. I kind of figured immigration was going to be an issue, and I didn't quite think it was going to be this drastic. I was thinking more along the lines of
gotten a little crazier than anyone expected.
Yeah.
A lot faster than anyone expected.
Exactly. So one of the benefits was I had already sort of had that on my radar as wanting to get involved and do some pro bono work in the immigration area. And I just moved to New Jersey over the summer from Texas, and so I don't really have the lay of the land here, and I don't know the organizations that are on the ground here doing that kind of work. And so it was great being at the airport because I met a guy from Catholic Charities, and he said, "Oh yeah, no, you can volunteer with us. We do training and everything for you." So I was like, "Oh, great!" So now I know where to go.
Yeah, I feel like this whole situation in some ways is basically like training the next generation of like lawyers fighting the good fight out there. And maybe people got a little lazy for the last 8 years.
That is the biggest. I think that is the biggest takeaway for lawyers from this. Is that, we've all just sort of relied on the ACLU being there and, other nonprofit organizations, filling in the gaps and representing these underserved clients. And I think this was a big wake-up call for the rest of us. We kind of do our pro bono and, I might go set up, organize a nonprofit for somebody and do their corporate filing or whatever. And yes, while that is valuable work, I think that it's a wake-up call for all of us that, okay, we need to kind of hone the rest of our skills. Like I'm doing a CLE tomorrow on habeas petitions. I haven't looked at that since law school.
Oh, God,
and it's something that, I think given the environment that we're in, we all need to sort of dust off those very basic, like civil rights type skills. Learn, refresh our memory as to, how the different branches of our government work and be ready to, act, to call it out, first of all, when it's not working the way it's supposed to be. And then, to do something about it, to really push back. I mean, I think that's kind of how we got into this situation generally as a country, is we sort of took our democracy for granted. And, I think that is ending. I think we're all waking up.
I think it has ended, yes.
And,
no one's feeling too complacent now about,
Exactly. And like, lawyers are, I've had this great feeling this week. I was like, yeah, lawyers are necessary.
I think that's one of the things
I
think as we wrap up, I think that's one of the things that's worth pointing out is I think sometimes, people who are thinking about, maybe I could do this, but they get intimidated. This stuff is actually really fun and really empowering, I find.
100%. Yeah. I mean, it was, this isn't, I didn't go to law school to be a civil rights lawyer or anything like that, but it's something that every lawyer can do and contribute to, which I think, it's like this wonderful kind of bonus of our profession, right? We have this very specific skill set that is very useful and we don't always use it. But we can, and there are so many opportunities, and I mean, there are going to be a lot more in the next 4 years. So, we should all seize them because it is really a wonderful opportunity, and I've never been so proud of this profession. I mean, just seeing everybody jump in, participate. Just as an aside, I know you're recording, but I have to say this, but my. I saw something, there's the conspiracy theories on the right wing that like George Soros is funding all of this.
Oh yeah, he's paying people to protest.
As I was walking my daughter to school this morning, I was like, let's do a math problem, sweetheart. There are 5 lawyers at Newark Airport every day from 7 a.m. to 1 a.m. Let's say the average billable hour rate between those lawyers is $300 an hour.
Wow.
They're there 7 days a week, and we calculated it was something like $200,000 a week.
Wow.
And it's like, I don't think George Soros is going to fund that. That's one airport.
Yeah, that's one airport. And that's a pretty, the small airport.
Your presence of all of the airports. You go do that at JFK and you've got quite the legal bill. So,
yeah, I mean, it's amazing. It really is like what people are willing to do.
If you tally up the financial, like the cost of this, I mean, obviously everybody's happy to do this for free, but I mean, if you tally up the value of the hours that are being spent, oh my God. It's astronomical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about it that way, you're just like, whoa, this is a lot of lawyer money time being spent, which is amazing.
So, I mean, the next time somebody complains about, lawyers billing by the hour, you say, well, yeah, we do. And we're expensive, but you know what? When it really counts,
we have skills.
We're willing to work for free.
Exactly.
And we give them away. We have the skills and we give them away. Like when it's really, things are on the line, we're happy to do it. So it was great.
Yeah, I saw someone tweet out.
Very reaffirming experience.
Yeah, someone tweeted, "I take back every lawyer joke I've ever made." You guys are on the ground. People were literally sitting on the ground, writing these habeas petitions at JFK, which, you see that picture and it's just like, wow, this this is a really great thing. I mean, obviously everyone would prefer not to be having to do it, but, you know, given the situation, This is amazing.
Every airport looks like that too. I mean, it's so funny. Like even in Newark, one of the girls brought a printer, you know, and so we're sitting there outside. And of course, you know, being lawyers, everybody hunts down the coffee shop, and so everyone's sitting outside like the coffee shop at Newark, and you know, we had a bunch of people sitting around just this makeshift, like there were just tables pushed together. There's a printer sitting on a chair, you know, there's cords everywhere, you know, makeshift signs in English and Arabic and Farsi. And I mean, it was kind of hilarious. I mean, we were all calling it, you know, the Newark office and, you know, or the Newark remote office. Yeah.
Awesome. I just thought of another, I think there's a Twitter account called Help the Lawyers that people can tweet out like what they need. The printer reminded it like, oh, we need more toner, we need this. And so if people are looking for a practical way to do some good, you know, they can't necessarily go and sit there, but you might be able to send over, you know,
100%.
the Amazon drone to deliver the printer cartridge or something.
Yeah, exactly. And that account is really good at, they're connected to all the airport accounts. And so they're really good if somebody says, hey, you know, I'm near Newark. Do they need help? You know, they'll tweet at us and reach out, and then, you know, we'll let them know if there's anything needed. So, yeah, that's also a great, that's actually a good account, I think, to get information from too. You know, I was following it this morning and seeing what they were posting, and they've got, you know, they've posted some pictures of lawyers at the airport, and there's some updates on kind of general stuff going on. But yeah, that's a good account as well.
Awesome. Well, Cindy, thank you so much for your time and for what you're doing. This was super interesting. And if any of our listeners are interested in getting involved, you can check the show notes, and we will link to all these things that we've talked about.
All right. Thanks so much, Allison.
Thank you. A big thanks to Sarah and Cindy and all of the other lawyers doing this important work. If you enjoyed this special episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We would really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to Lee and Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. If you have questions about any of the resources in this episode or you'd like to get involved, please check the show notes. We'll have a lot of stuff for you. Thanks again for listening, and we'll talk soon.